Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this evening for our webinar on UCAS and personal statements. My name is Katie. I'm part of the Schools and Colleges team at Royal Holloway, University of London. And joining me tonight, I've got two colleagues. So I've got James Casey and Charlotte Pym as well. So James and Charlotte are both my colleagues in the schools team, and they're going to be forming part of the panel for the Q&A later on. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So just by way of introduction, here's a map of our lovely campus at Royal Holloway. So as you can see, it's set in 135 acres of parkland. The campus is super green and lovely, and it's made up of lots of different types of buildings, obviously. So we've got our accommodation buildings that you can see kind of north of the A30 there, and also down at the bottom of the hill towards the sports pitches. So the accommodation is kind of a mix of catered and self-catered, ensuite, shared bathrooms and things like that. We've got academic buildings, of course, as well, probably the most important part, arguably. So they're all clustered towards the middle of campus, just behind the Founders Building, which is that sort of orangey one you can see bottom left there. And social spaces as well. So we've got a students' union and a nightclub on campus. We've got a pub as well, and we've also got sports spaces. So you can see the sports pitches down at the bottom of campus there. And we've got a gym as well. So coming up on screen, you should also be able to see some of our academic departments. So within each of these departments, we've got anywhere between sort of maybe 3, 4, 5 to 15 or 20 different academic degrees you could be undertaking. So all in all, across all these different departments, there's about 250 undergraduate degrees you could be studying at Royal Holloway. So that's enough about our lovely campus and our courses. Moving on then to the main part of today's session. So we're going to be taking a look at what the UCAS process actually entails. And then we're going to focus in on the personal statement, which is probably the biggest and arguably the most important part of that process. And then we're going to look at the next steps you can be taking after you've written your personal statement as well. So to start things off then, what is the UCAS process? So UCAS, you probably hear that term bandied about quite a lot, but what does it actually stand for? It actually stands for the Universities and Colleges Admissions Service. So it started in, I think, the early 1990s or thereabouts, and it's basically the main platform through which you apply to all UK undergraduate courses, and also for conservatoires and drama schools and things like that. So some quick facts for you on UCAS then. So all applications are now done online, and you can add up to 5 choices. Applications cost £22.50 for one choice or £27 for 5 choices. That's just because there are obviously administration costs associated with running the platform. And a crucial fact here as well, providers can't see other choices when you apply. Okay, so obviously if you choose to apply to 5 different universities, the rest won't know that you've applied to the other ones or which ones you've applied to. And here's a timeline that you might wish to be following for current Year 12 students, okay? So for Year 12 students, the UCAS platform will open for registration in May 2024, okay? So over that summer of 2024, you want to be thinking about researching and visiting universities and just starting to sort of think broadly about what you might like to study and where you might like to study as well. As you then move into Year 13, so that will be September 2024, UCAS will open for applications to be sent. Okay, however, I would say submitting them in September probably is very early, but the option will be there for you. As we move into October 2024, then you'll get to the deadline for the early entry courses. So these courses are medicine, veterinary medicine, and dentistry. And the other early entry options as well are any undergraduate courses at either Oxford or Cambridge. Okay, so generally speaking, for these courses, it's mid-October. So for context, this year it was the 15th of October. So hopefully there's no one on this call that was planning to apply for those courses, because that deadline has unfortunately already passed for this year. And then as we move into mid to late January 2025, that's when we get the general application deadline. So that will be for any other courses that aren't those ones we've previously mentioned. However, it's worth noting that if you're currently studying at a school or college, they are likely to have much earlier internal deadlines. So you'll need to be adhering to those as well. And they're probably going to be maybe around the November or December mark. And then the application timeline for current year 13s. So obviously you're a lot further along in that process. So we're already past the point of the mid-October deadline, as I mentioned, for medicine, veterinary, dentistry, or Oxford or Cambridge courses. So we're now working towards that late January 2024 general application deadline. Okay, so here is an overview of the UCAS process step by step. So we're sort of, throughout the course of this talk, we're going to return back to this slide and look up where we are in that process. So the very first step would be to register and actually start your application. So if you are applying through your school or college, you will need a buzzword, and that buzzword is obviously specific, so it will link your application to your school or college so that your teacher or advisor can add your teacher reference, okay? And that's just to make sure you don't get lost in the system or accidentally attributed to another school. So it's very important you make sure you've got the right buzzword and you check with your school or careers tutor. So the next step then is to complete your profile. So this is what the profile will look on UCAS. It's different sections that you have to go through step by step and fill in and then mark as complete. So your personal details obviously is things like name, date of birth and gender. Your contact details are going to be your phone, phone number, address, email address, things like that. In this section, you also include information of your nominated access. So that's somebody that you trust to talk to the universities that you're applying to or UCAS about your application on your behalf. So some people will use a parent or guardian for that. And then you also include your residency status in that section as well. So the next two sections will be education and employment. So under education, that's where you add in your schools or colleges. Then you'll add in your qualifications such as GCSEs one by one and include here what you're currently studying. In the employment section, this is where you would talk about paid employment. Obviously, this isn't mandatory. If you've not had paid employment in the past, that's more than fine, but you still have to mark it complete, even if you're not adding anything in there. So the next two sections then, nationality details. So this is where you include your country of birth. If that's not the UK, you have to mention here when you entered the UK. And under supporting information, this section is quite important because this is your opportunity to mention anything that you would like providers to know about any additional needs. Okay, so that can be mental health needs, physical needs, learning needs. There's some examples coming up on the screen just now for you. So things like visual impairments, being deaf or hard of hearing, mental health conditions, basically anything that you feel comfortable disclosing that you feel like you would like the universities or colleges that you're applying to know so that they can support you during your studies. That's what that section there is for. So moving on then, the final two boxes, English language skills. So that's just where you mention if English is your first language. And then finance and funding. So you're going to tell the providers how you're going to be paying for your studies. So for UK students, the vast majority, that will be student finance. Okay, so moving on then to the choices section. So the choices section is where you put down the courses that you are going to be applying to, and it's nice and simple, it's right at the top there. And as I mentioned, you have 5 choices that you can put down. So coming up on the screen now, you'll see an example of 2 different candidates, okay? So the first candidate you can see on the screen there has applied for 5 courses at 5 different universities, but they've gone for the exact same degree at each different university. Okay, so they've used up all 5 of their choices on 5 different universities. The second student has gone down a slightly different route. So they've applied for 3 different universities, but they've applied for different courses at the same university. So as you can see, those top 3 options there are all Royal Holloway courses, but they're just different courses. So they've gone for history, ancient history and classics. And then their final 2 choices they've used up on different universities. So each of these students have used up all 5 of their choices. Okay, so it's worth noting that those 5 choices don't necessarily apply to 5 different universities, it is courses. Okay. And final point here, remember that every single university you apply to will receive the same personal statement, okay? You only get to write one personal statement for all of those courses. So you really shouldn't be mentioning specific universities by name, because then the others will know that that's the one you're really gunning for and they might be less likely to make you an offer. Okay, I've also added in a bit here about contextual offers. So these are quite interesting to think about if you may be eligible for them. So most universities do have a contextual offer policy. They essentially look at widening access criteria and individual circumstances. And the idea of them is that they'll make a reduced grade offer if you meet those widening access criteria. So by way of example, at Royal Holloway, let's pick a course at random. So psychology, for example, we generally look for 3 A's at A level for psychology. If you meet the widening access criteria to qualify for a contextual offer, we'll make you an offer of ABB instead. So it is worth looking into if you qualify for a contextual offer. If you do want to find out more about this, you can usually just Google the name of the university you're interested in and the words contextual offers, and most universities will have a page detailing their criteria for it. So moving on to the next section of the application, which would be writing a personal statement. So a personal statement is essentially a reflective essay, and it's really your chance to promote yourself as an individual to that university. It does have a character limit of 4,000 characters, and this does include spaces. So make sure when you're writing out in your word processing document that you include spaces in that count. And the maximum line count is 47 lines as well. Remember, like I said earlier, you've only got one statement for all 5 choices. So don't mention a university by name. They are also checked for plagiarism, so make sure it's your own work. And you don't need to talk about grades here, because you're mentioning grades in the other part of the application, so you don't need to reference grades in the personal statement. So what should you be including then? So first and foremost, you want to be talking about some academic content. So ideally, this is stuff you're doing outside of your lessons or outside of teachers telling you to do, that shows your interest and commitment to the subject. So there's some examples on the screen there, podcasts, documentaries, free online courses. These can be in the form of MOOCs. So MOOCs stand for Massive Online Open Course, and these are free courses that a lot of universities run. So if there is one of those on a subject you're planning to apply to, run by a university that you're interested in, I would really suggest taking part in them. There's also summer schools run by a lot of universities, museums as well, public buildings, TED Talks, taster days, and journal articles. So if you can be taking part in any of these things, that are really great things to talk about in a personal statement. You can mention work experience as well. So this could be part-time, voluntary work, work shadowing, online programs, or even school run programs. So if you've not had a part-time job yet, don't worry, you could just talk about a work experience project that you've perhaps done as part of your school or college work. And finally, extracurricular activities. So these are all your interests that you have outside of school. So if you're part of a sports team, or if you're part of an amateur dramatic society, if you play a musical instrument, if you enjoy traveling, or school leadership roles as well. So if you were a prefect or head boy or girl, and volunteering as well, you can mention here. So in terms of finding the right balance of how much you want to be talking about these things, so that academic content needs to be the main bulk of your personal statement, okay? So probably about 70%. And then you need to be talking about why you've chosen the subject, what particularly interests you about this subject, where that interest has come from, and what independent reading or research you've done. So that's your MOOCs and your TED Talks and your journal articles we were just talking about on the previous slide. So that all needs to be in that academic content part of the personal statement, and it needs to be about 70% of the whole statement. The non-academic content, you're looking at about 30%. So that's where you talk about the other skills and experiences that you have, what you've done outside of your studies, and how these are relevant. So that's a really crucial point actually with your personal statement. You always want to be linking the points that you're making back to the course, okay? So what skills you've developed from those activities that will make you a better student for that university, or make you a better student for that specific course. And to help with that, coming up on the screen now, you should be able to see the structure that we generally suggest. So part 1, you want to obviously have an introduction. This doesn't need to be too long. It just needs to outline why you're interested in this course and why you want to study it at degree level. So you really need to be getting that motivation for studying that course across in the introduction. Part 2 is where you discuss your subject academically. So that's that 70% that we were talking about earlier, where you talk about perhaps how your A-levels link to your chosen course, but crucially what independent reading or research you've done and other course-related activities that you've taken part in. So when we say parts, part 1, part 2, part 3, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be one paragraph. Obviously 70% of your personal statement, that would be an awful lot to fit in one paragraph. You should be splitting these out by point, really. Part 3 is where you talk about extracurriculars. So this is going to be a smaller section, obviously, than part 2. This is the 30%. And you talk about the additional activities you've taken part in. And again, like I said earlier, how these skills are relevant for studying at university level. Part 4, your conclusion. So students often find this bit quite tricky, but it doesn't need to be long and it doesn't need to stress you out in any way. It just needs to be a short summary of what you've written already. You shouldn't really be making any new points in a conclusion, but a really nice way to wrap up a personal statement is to mention a career ambition and how studying that degree will help you to achieve that. That's something that universities quite like to see in a conclusion. So moving on then to the ABCs method. So the ABCs method is a really good way to structure those individual paragraphs, okay? So ABCs stands for activity, benefit, course, and specifics. So the activity is what you did. The benefit is what you gained from doing that activity. Course is obviously linking it back to the course. And then specifics, that's not necessarily a separate part of the paragraph, but you should be sort of dropping the specifics throughout the paragraph. So numbers, for example, names of academics whose journal articles you read, for example, titles, things like that. So here's an example of an ABC's structure. So the activity, you completed the online MOOC Understanding Biological Energy by Dr. James McAvoy. The benefit, you gain knowledge in modern biotechnology and biofuels. C, course, so this demonstrated how biology can be used in combating climate change, creating a green revolution, something I wish to study further. So that's a really good example of how it directly links to the course the student is interested in. And then next to the S there, the specifics, you can see they've been mentioned throughout. So MOOC, obviously that's the specific activity you did, the title of the MOOC, the academic that led it, and then some examples of the aspects of biology that the student is particularly interested in. So that's a really good way of structuring those paragraphs throughout the main sort of part 2 and 3 of your personal statement. So moving on then to editing a personal statement. You will probably be sick to the back teeth of it by the time you're done with it, but you still need to edit it to death. So good ways to do that is try reading it out loud. That's a really good way to notice how it flows, and if there are any sort of structural problems, you can notice those by reading it aloud. Make use of the people around you as well to read it, because sometimes if you read something yourself so many times, you'll miss the same mistake again and again. A fresh pair of eyes might notice that. So make use of teachers, friends, and family members. Check names, dates, and technical language. You always want that to be accurate. Keep checking, like I said earlier, even when you're sick of it, do keep checking it. Make sure there's no passive language, such as I feel. So 2 problems with this. It doesn't come across like you know your own opinions if you use this too much. So you want to just say so-and-so happened, or I read, or I think this means. You don't want to be saying I feel like perhaps this means. The second problem with that is that it uses up an awful lot of your character count that you don't necessarily have. So try and keep it direct and to the point. And finally, spelling, grammar, and punctuation do need to be perfect. So getting other people to read it for you and check it for you will be great, but also you can make use of obviously grammar checking software as well. So just a quick note then, changes for 2025 entry. So this will be relevant for any Year 12s listening. So UCAS are currently reviewing the personal statement process. So at the moment, how we think this may look is that they're going to do away with the personal statement. And it's going to be replaced by 6 application questions. Now, this hasn't been confirmed for definite yet, so we don't 100% know what this is going to look like, but based on the information that we have, it's looking like it's going to be, as I say, 6 questions based roughly around these things you can see on the screen here. So motivation for course, preparedness for course, preparation through other experiences, extenuating circumstances, preparedness for study, and preferred learning styles. So it looks, based on the information they've given us, like these questions are broadly going to be asking similar sorts of things as they've previously been looking for in personal statements. So hopefully you can while we're still not 100% sure how it's going to look, you can continue to prepare for this throughout the course of year 12, similarly to how you would prepare for writing a personal statement, and just wait to see until UCAS confirm what they're planning to do for 2025 entry. But that's just something to bear in mind for the year 12 students. So moving on then to the next step of the process. So this will be the reference. So these are written by teachers, careers advisors, or a personal tutor. They provide universities with an informed and positive academic account of you. They provide information about extenuating circumstances, and they can assist, obviously, in the selection and decision-making process by universities. So what are the next steps then? After you've done your personal statement, your teacher's done the reference, it's all ready to go. So 3 next steps. There's a declaration button that you tick to say everything is true as far as you know. You make your payment of £27 for your 5 choices, and then you hit that submit button. So once you've hit the submit button, obviously it will all go off to UCAS, who will send it on to the universities you have selected. And within however many weeks, it's usually anywhere between sort of 1 and 8 weeks, you'll start seeing responses from your universities. And you'll then have to go on to choose one as a firm and one as an insurance choice. So university responses then, what are the kind of things they could come back to you with? So the first response is a conditional offer. So that means your place at this university is dependent on the grade offer that you receive. So, you know, you can come here if you get 2 A's and a B, including an A in maths, for example. The next type of offer is unconditional. So that means you have a confirmed place regardless of the grades you receive. I will say this kind of offer is incredibly unusual. They're usually reserved for students that perhaps have taken a gap year and already know what grades they're going to get. And then the final type of response is an unsuccessful response. So unfortunately, you've not been accepted by this university for the course. I think if you do get an unsuccessful response from a university, you can try asking for feedback. Universities are generally receptive to that. So firm and insurance choices then. So these are the 2 choices that you select out of your 5 once you've had your responses back. So your firm is your first choice university. So that's the one you definitely will be going to if you get the grade. So this is often an aspirational university. So maybe pitch that maybe roughly in line with or slightly higher than your predicted grades. And then your insurance choice is your second choice university. So these might be lower grades and generally a safer option, so kind of like your safety net option. And don't forget as well, there's a little note there to attend applicant days. So these are open days that universities generally run in the spring term that are specifically designed for offer holders or applicants to help them make that final decision in which universities they want to make their firm or insurance choices. Okay, so the next 2 steps, confirming on results day. So what actually happens on results day? So you obviously receive your results, so that might be online or you might go to your school or college to collect them. And then you'll check your UCAS account and 3 things can happen. So you'll either be accepted to your firm choice, which is probably the optimum outcome, right? So you've got the grades you needed to get into your first choice university. You might be accepted into your insurance choice and not your firm choice. So that's your safety net option. So you got good enough grades for that one, but maybe just missed out on your firm choice. Or the third option is you enter clearing because you've unfortunately not been accepted into either your firm or your insurance choice. Okay, so what might that look like? So if you do enter clearing for that reason, because you've not been accepted to your firm or insurance choice, you may well be accepted to an alternative course, perhaps at a different university. So clearing is essentially where universities will offer places on their courses they've not filled up yet, perhaps with slightly lower entry requirements. However, it's becoming more common for students to enter clearing even if they've been accepted to their firm choice because they've done better than they anticipated. So students will use clearing as well to apply for a more aspirational university, perhaps in their firm choice, because they have done better than they were planning to. Okay, so tips for UCAS success then. The first one is obviously to start early. That's the best thing you can do to avoid stress further on down the line. This one might seem like an obvious one, but noting down your username, password and UCAS number really helps to just minimize stress. I would say especially on clearing morning, if it does get to it, make sure you've got all of those things. And finally, using all resources available to you. So make use of all the university resources that are out there on university websites, make use of the careers resources at your school or college, make use of the teachers and careers counsellors as well. Okay, so that's everything from me. We can move on to the questions part of the webinar now. So I will hand over to my colleague James, who's going to chair the questions panel.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Katie. There was some really useful info in there that hopefully was really helpful to everyone joining us tonight. Yeah, so we're moving on to the question and answer section of this evening's session. Thank you to everyone who has pre-submitted some questions for us. I've got a nice long list for us to get through in the next 20 to 30 minutes or so. In terms of other questions, we do have a question function on GoToWebinar this evening, so please feel free to submit any questions that have arisen throughout the session so far, and of course we can get those answered for you as well. In terms of one thing I will just note as a sort of general thing, we will sort of be answering any general questions tonight. I can see there were a few submitted around specific circumstances. I'm going to try my best to avoid answering them, if that's okay, just so that we can sort of keep it useful for everyone who's joining us. If you do have any specific questions, definitely get in touch with our admissions team, or of course, you hopefully will be able to find lots of details on our website as well. But yes, I'm going to start with this really good question, and I'm going to pose this to you, Charlotte. Do you think it's better to submit your UCAS application earlier or later?
That's a very good question, and the answer is absolutely earlier. The earlier the better, really. That's not only it's mainly for you, to be honest. And the earlier you submit it, you get it out of the way, it means you can really focus on your studies, on whether it's A-levels, BTECs, whatever it is you're studying. The earlier you submit it, the better, I would recommend. So if your school or college do have internal deadlines, definitely make sure that you do meet them.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got one here for Katie, which hopefully builds on a little bit from what you've been speaking about as well. If you're applying for a joint honours course, does it matter if the personal statement favours one subject more than the other?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think writing a personal statement for a joint honours course, I would say, is slightly trickier, but I would say it depends if you're applying for all 5 joint honours courses that are all the same combination of subjects. If you are, then I would try and pitch it as sort of 50-50 between the two. If you're not, so let's say, for example, you're applying for, I don't know, English and history at 2 universities, and then you're applying for just English at the other universities, I would say probably tailor it a little bit more towards English, and then refer to history, but perhaps through an English lens. So perhaps looking at the analytical skills you've gained from reading history books or from your history A-level classes. But that's a really good question.
Fantastic, thank you. And another one that sort of built on what we've been hearing about this evening. I have a lot of extracurricular examples that I've put time into, but are they worth mentioning? I can take this one. Hopefully you've seen from Katie's session that absolutely they are worth mentioning. They are just as valuable as your academic examples. It's all about having that right balance. So you probably saw there in the lovely pie chart that we presented, 70% needs to be focused on your academic content. So some really good, strong, specific examples based around you as an academic. And then that other 30% needs to be you as a person, extracurricular you, taking part in some really cool activities, whether it be sport, music, any of your hobbies, any volunteering or part-time work experience that you've had, anything like that, of course, is just as valuable. Essentially, it's anything that you can pull out those really good skills from that you know will be relevant for the university course that you are applying for. So yeah, really good question. Thank you for that. Another one for Charlotte then as well. What do you think is the ideal personal statement length? Is there a too long that will bore admissions officers?
It's also a good question. So as Katie mentioned in the presentation, you are capped at the number of characters, including spaces and lines that you can use. It is quite short. A lot of students, when they first write their personal statement, might go over slightly, so you need to keep it within that limit, but I would recommend using that limit as much of it as you can. When you do split your time between the 70 and the 30%, you will realise that it is quite hard to write it in that concise word count. So yeah, try and use all of it, but make sure that the examples you're getting in are as clear and concise as they can be to maximise the words that you do have.
Fantastic, thank you. Another one for Katie then as well. What are the best types of academic sources and activities that you think you can add to your personal statement?
Yeah, good question. So as I've mentioned in the presentation, really, I think, you know, generally speaking, universities will refer to like wider reading, and I think that can sometimes panic students a bit because they feel like they should be reading journal articles. I would say, to be honest, if you're at the A-level stage or college stage of your education, reading journal articles from start to finish is quite a high expectation, so I wouldn't worry if that feels like a lot. There's definitely other sources of referencing that wider research. So as I mentioned, MOOCs, so those massive online open courses, are a really, really good way to do that. TED Talks as well. I mean, TED Talks are great because they are essentially similar sort of content to what an academic would have put in a journal article, and they're usually led by academics, but they're just, you know, condensing it down into a more digestible format for sort of lay people. So you're still getting similar content across without having to wade through a journal article. So I would say those are probably the two top ones. But yeah, any of the ones that were mentioned in the slides.
Fantastic, thank you. The flip side of that then, I've had a question come in here around how can I relate my work experience to the course that I am applying for? The big thing to really emphasize there, it's slightly different obviously to the academic content. It's going to be about pulling out those transferable skills. So really good life skills essentially that can be used in a variety of situations. It could be communication skills, problem solving skills, the ability to think critically about situations, anything like that that you think you have demonstrated or developed as part of your work experience in your spare time. Of course, those sort of skills are going to be really, really useful for a university course, regardless of the subject that you are applying for. So I definitely say, see if you can emphasize those transferable skills, and of course, just demonstrate why they are relevant to the course that you are applying for. So yeah, really good question again. Thanks very much. We've had a specific one here come in about Royal Holloway. Charlotte, I'm going to ask you this as well. Are my chances of getting into Royal Holloway still as high if I apply in late January?
So that's a good question. So as you'll all have seen in Katie's presentation, the UCAS deadline is around January. That's correct, isn't it? Yeah. And so you would need to apply before that. But in terms of if your chances are better, I don't believe they're better if you apply earlier. As long as you apply before that deadline, you'll have the same sort of chance as everybody else. The only time that would be significantly different is where Katie mentioned earlier, clearing. So if you get to a point of being in clearing, you're not guaranteed that those courses will still be available, but you'll have the same sort of chance as everyone else on the UCAS deadline day in January as you would if you applied in October.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Absolutely, I would second that point. Obviously, our advice is always to get it in sooner rather than later, just for your own peace of mind. But in theory, your application is just as valuable in January as it would be now, for instance. So yeah, hopefully that helps your situation. This one for Katie then. Is having a bold/interesting introduction a key for my personal statement?
Ooh, good question. I think the main thing that admissions tutors are looking for from an introduction is outlining the motivation, or your motivation for studying that course. I don't think it has to be overly dramatic. I have read a few where people have, you know, talked about sort of really personal stories from their past, and that's like their motivation for studying it. I don't feel like you need to do anything like that. Just as long as that motivation for studying that subject is coming across, then it's a good introduction.
Fantastic. We've had a question here specifically for is there any help available to mature students who aren't getting much guidance? Hopefully you found this evening's session really useful. Just in terms of extra resource as well, we do have lots available on our website, the Schools and Colleges team page on the Royal Holloway website. I definitely encourage you to check that out. If you do want any extra support, as I said, hopefully you've seen from Katie's session tonight, there's a wide range of places you are able to get that online, also through UCAS directly. In terms of how you might slightly differ your personal statement if you are applying as a mature learner, I definitely emphasise the academic examples that you have from previous experiences in your life, whether it is A-levels, BTECs or T-levels, of course, it could be quite different if you're applying from someone who has a different educational background. Again, it's just pulling out those really good specific academic content examples that you have, and of course the extracurricular side of it will be super important as well. So don't undervalue that side that you might have extra experience on as a mature learner as well. So yeah, hopefully that helps answer your question. We've had a few more come in on the live question function. I'm just going to get some ready for us. Okay, so one for Katie here. Is it worth mentioning volunteering if it doesn't link directly to your course?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is definitely. So as I've mentioned, it's what you need to be focusing on with everything that you refer to in your personal statement is always linking it back to the course. And there's always a skill that you'll have gotten from anything that you can make relevant to the course. So those transferable skills. So things like, you know, communication skills or presentation skills or time management, anything like that. So if you, I don't know, if you, for example, volunteered in like girl guiding or scouts or something like that, if that's your voluntary work, but you're applying for medicine, I mean, there's definitely transferable skills you develop from that you could talk about. So like, you know, people skills, I suppose, leadership skills, things like that. So just find the skills that are transferable and focus in on those.
Really good, thank you so much. Another one come in here on the live chat. This one's for you, Charlotte. Do unis care about the grades or the personal statement more? I have achieved my grades, but I'm worried that my personal statement won't stand out. What do you think in response to that?
So that's also a good question. So the answer to that is it is both. The first thing the university will likely look at are the grades, just to see if you're sort of in a ballpark of reaching those grades. So for example, if you're applying for a course that's AAA and if you're predicted CCC, then they might not look at the personal statement as much. Whereas if you are predicted a similar grade to the entry requirements, then they will look at that personal statement. So it is a combination of the two. And some universities will look at some parts more than others. Some departments will look at some more than others. So it's quite hard to give a straight answer to that. But my answer would be to try and, if you're already predicted the grades, then try and put in as much effort as you can to that personal statement to make it stand out as best you can, to give yourself the best chance. But yeah, the answer is a bit of both.
Fantastic, thank you, that's perfect. Another one for Katie, just a bit of clarification potentially. Will teacher references still be happening for 2024 entry?
Yes, they will. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so there's been a slight little bit of change in the teacher reference this year. So for those of you applying for this September, there is a little bit of change for your teachers, but it's nothing that you need to be sort of concerned about or anything. It's just a slight change in process for them ahead of then next year, when there are going to be obviously some changes in the personal statement that Katie outlined in the talk. But yeah, not necessarily anything you need to be aware of right now. We've also had a question come in. If I am a student looking to apply for a UK university, but I am from Spain, grades aren't quite the same and school varies a little, how should I write the personal statement? So I'm happy to take that one. I would always emphasise that structure that we've given you. That's the really important structure that we would advise following. So always remember that balance of 70% academic content and 30% extracurricular content. In terms of the qualifications that you are currently studying, if you could probably go through each of the subjects that you're studying at the moment, and again, if they are relevant to the course that you're applying for university, of course, demonstrate your excellent academic prowess within that. I understand, of course, if your qualifications are slightly different, you might study more subjects than maybe just 3. Again, it's just making sure that you can demonstrate your prowess for the subject that you're applying for. I'd always emphasize that. And as I said, if you have got any work experience, volunteering, work shadowing, anything that you can do in your extracurricular examples that will be super helpful for you, then again, definitely emphasize that side of it as well. I can't sort of highlight enough just how important pulling out those transferable skills are within your personal statement, because they're going to really, really super impress an admissions tutor who will be reading your statement. Okay. Okay, so I think we've had one final question come in. So in case there are any final questions that want to be asked, please do submit them now whilst we answer this one. So are societies which are linked to your course highly praised while being reviewed in your application? Katie, do you want to take that one? Potentially any sort of clubs and societies that they might have taken part in before, how important are they for your personal statement?
Yeah, I think that is going to be really great experience. That'll come across really well in a personal statement for sure. So yeah, I suppose I'm trying to think of an example. If you're perhaps applying for like a politics degree or a law degree, and if you take part in like a debating club at your school or college, that's going to look like really fantastic experience. I suppose also it's a chance to develop practical skills that perhaps your A-level or BTEC course might not necessarily be giving you as well. So yeah, I would say they're great things to include for sure.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you so much. I think we've had one final question come in that time. Again, this could be a good one, maybe for all of us to input on. Is there any tips that you have when trying to reduce the character count on your personal statement? Personally, I would always advise if you can keep an eye on your sort of short, snappy sentences. Maybe you've developed a sentence that's a little bit too long. Again, maybe if you can cut that down half in size, that's quite an easy way of cutting down some characters. Katie or Charlotte, have you got any advice there where you potentially cut down a personal statement?
Yeah, leading on that one, I remember I was always someone that would write sentences that were too long and were a little bit waffly. And one thing I got advised with the Control F function in Word, you can you can search for key things basically. And if you Control F for full stops, you can see how long some of those sentences really are. So if you have a sentence that's taken over a whole paragraph, for example, that's a really easy way to point out to yourself where that sentence is, and then you can look through and see how you can condense that in. And like Katie said earlier, having friends and family read it, they might read through it and point out a few words that you think are necessary, but they really might not be.
Yeah, just to add on to that as well, that Control F tip is really good. I've not heard that before. That's a good one. I like that. But yeah, I would definitely say time and again when I read personal statements, I think students use what I call flowery language of like really nice to have, and it sounds great if you have the character count for it, but you just don't with a personal statement, sadly, because it has to be so short. So yeah, just really go through and check if there are words or even probably multiple words that you can remove from sentences that will not change the meaning of the sentence. It's a really good way to save character count. And yeah, of course, in an ideal world, it would sound nicer probably keeping it in, but you won't be sort of judged for not having that kind of stuff in there because, like with keep emphasizing, personal statements do have to be so brief.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really good advice. Thank you both. Yeah, really good stuff. And we've had one final question come in, really important question. Are teacher references still required for people who have been working full time? It's slightly different. If you are applying as someone who has not recently been in education, you will still have to give a reference essentially. Quite often that's from an employer, someone that can sort of provide that reference for you academically. That's the sort of thing that you'll need to provide. So again, maybe just had to think about who you might want best to give that reference for you. As I said, slightly different compared to having a teacher reference if you are currently in full-time education. So yes, hopefully that answers that one for you. I think that is all the questions that we've had submitted. As I said, for those one or two that potentially we haven't been able to answer because of the specific nature of them, I definitely advise you checking out our website. So please do have a look at that. And we do have an admissions inquiry form. So if you feel like you want to get in touch with one of our admissions team about something really specific to check your individual circumstances, I would definitely advise you fill in that form as well. So, okay, fantastic. Thank you for joining us here this evening. I'm going to say a big thank you to Charlotte for joining us for the Q&A session as well. And of course, a massive thank you to Katie for leading the slides for tonight's session. If you do want to catch up on any of this evening's webinar, we will be posting it onto our YouTube channel in the next few days. So check it out. Our YouTube channel is the Royal Holloway Schools Liaison Team. So definitely check us out if you want to catch up on anything, or maybe you just want to go back over one or two little bits that Katie's presented to you tonight as well. But yes, that's a big thank you from me, and a big thank you from Charlotte and Katie as well. And thank you very much for joining us this evening, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.